My most thrilling and disconcerting day ever started with an unexpected meeting with my stepsister Emily on a Thursday afternoon. The silence of the house was only broken by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. I had been home alone, flipping through television channels aimlessly, trying to quell the boredom that had settled over me like a thick fog. There were errands to run. My dad and his wife, Catherine, were out running errands, so it was just me and Emily at home. Usually I like having the house to myself, but lately things have been different. Emily and I never really clicked, even though we're about the same age. We're totally different people. She's super organized and detail-oriented. I'm more of a laid-back person. Today, my dad and his wife Catherine left together, leaving Emily and me alone in the house. Usually that's fine with me, but not this time. Emily and I have never been close, even though we're about the same age. We're very different. Emily is organized and meticulous. She always has a plan. I prefer a more spontaneous approach to life. We only interacted when we said hello and exchanged a few words. We kept a comfortable distance between us. But over the past few weeks, I noticed a change in her behavior. Her eyes would linger on me for a moment longer than usual. She was always in the room, and she was a little too close for comfort. It was subtle, nothing obvious, but I felt like something had changed. We'd gone back to being more spontaneous with our lives, and we only really talked when we had to. We were still a bit distant, but I could tell her eyes were on me more often. She was always in the room, and it felt a little too close for comfort. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that we had this unspoken connection. That afternoon, I was in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone. The sunlight was streaming through the windows, making the room warm. I tried to ignore the strange energy that seemed to be there whenever Emily was around. I thought she'd been in her room all day, but when I heard footsteps behind me, I knew she was about to come in. "Hey, Emily," I said. There was an unspoken vibe between us that afternoon. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone. The sunlight streaming through the windows cast a warm glow over the room, and I tried to ignore the strange energy that seemed to permeate the air whenever Emily was near. She had been in her room all day, or so I thought, but when I heard footsteps behind me, I knew she was about to make her presence known. "Hey!" Emily's voice broke the silence as she entered the kitchen. I looked up from my phone, and my heart skipped a beat as I saw Emily standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She appeared relaxed, yet there was something in her eyes, a spark of something that made my pulse quicken. I replied casually, trying to maintain my composure. "What's up?" She shrugged, walking further into the kitchen. Her gaze never left mine. "Not much. Just felt like coming downstairs. It's pretty quiet." I looked up from my phone when I heard her enter the kitchen. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her standing there, arms crossed over her chest. She looked relaxed, but there was something in her eyes, a spark, that made my pulse quicken. "What's up?" I replied casually, trying to keep my cool. "I just felt like coming downstairs. It's pretty quiet in here." "Yeah, it is." I agreed, putting my phone on the table. "Catherine and Dad won't be back for a while." Emily looked at the clock, and then at me. She had a mischievous smile on her lips. "I understand." She spoke with a provocative undertone. "That's why I came downstairs." A knot tightened in my stomach. I felt a mix of fear and excitement. Her gaze had a certain quality, a humorous yet earnest glimmer, that captivated and disconcerted me. She approached the "Yeah, it is." I agreed to put my phone on the table. "Catherine and Dad won't be back for a while." Emily looked at the clock, and then at me, a playful smile on her face. "I get it." She spoke in a playful tone, which is why I came down. A knot tightened in my stomach, a mix of fear and excitement. Her gaze had a certain quality, a funny but serious glimmer that both captivated and disconcerted me. She went to the stove, got a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water. She moved with deliberate elegance, each step calculated as if she were aware that I was watching her every move, which I was. I was intrigued by her vibe, with her hair falling over her shoulders and her lips forming a knowing smile. "What are you doing here alone?" she asked, sipping from her glass and leaning against the counter, her eyes on me. I shrugged. Stove got the glass out of the cabinet and filled it with water. She moved forward in a way that made it seem like she knew I was watching her, like she was doing it on purpose. I was interested in her attitude, with her hair falling over her shoulders and her lips forming a knowing smile. "What are you doing here by yourself?" she asked, sipping from her glass and leaning against the counter, looking at me. I shrugged, trying to act like I wasn't interested. "I'm just passing the time," I said. She nodded and kept talking with me until they came back. "Your recent behavior has been strange," and her comment caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Emily tilted her head and smiled a little. "I don't know why you're avoiding me. I'm not avoiding you on purpose, but I may have subconsciously distanced ourselves." I blinked, surprised by her comment. I hadn't intentionally avoided her, but I guess I had done it without realizing it. I tried to act like I wasn't bothered, but it was hard. I nodded and smiled a little when she asked about Emily. I didn't know why she was acting this way, but I guess there was some tension between us. I wasn't trying to avoid her, but I'm not sure how to deal with it. I said I wasn't avoiding her, but I sounded unsure. She raised an eyebrow and put her glass down, like she was there too. I shifted in my seat, not sure what to do. I was keeping my distance, but something had changed. I felt a tension between us, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. I wasn't sure if I was just imagining it, or if she felt it too. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I was distracted. She spoke, but her explanation wasn't very convincing. Emily's smile got bigger as she got closer, and her eyes were shining with something I couldn't put my finger on. She was so busy that she didn't have time to talk with me. Her speech was full of, I had no idea how to respond. I wasn't sure if it was just me or if she also sensed it, but I had been trying to ignore it. I had been distracted. She spoke softly, knowing that her explanation wasn't very convincing. Emily's smile got bigger as she came closer, her eyes shining with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She was so busy that she couldn't talk with me. Her voice was light, but I could tell she was serious, and there was something she wasn't saying. "Emily, I'm not avoiding you," I said, my voice quieter and less sure as she got another step closer. Her body was just a few feet from mine, and the tension in the room got more intense, creating an electric atmosphere. My heart was beating really fast, and I swallowed hard to keep from getting nervous. "I think you're her," she said, her eyes meeting mine, but I didn't feel any obligation to agree. I blinked, surprised by what she'd said. The room felt more cramped, the distance between us getting smaller with every second. Emily's presence was overwhelming, making it hard to think straight. I said, "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," but it felt like I couldn't think straight. "I think you're her," she said, looking at me. "But I'm not sure." I blinked, surprised by what she said. The room felt smaller, and we were closer. Emily's presence was strong, and I had a hard time thinking. I said, "I don't get what you mean," but it seemed like she was getting closer to me, and I could feel the heat from her body. My pulse was fast, and I tried to understand what was happening. This was my stepsister, with whom I had lived for years. But in this moment, she didn't feel like herself. She didn't act like a sister at all. She seemed totally different. "There's no need for pretense, Alex," she said quietly. "I know you experience it too." I held my breath, caught in my throat, as her words sank in. She was right. I had felt the tension, the unspoken connection that had been building between us for weeks. I had tried as she seemed totally different. "There's no need for pretense, Alex," she said quietly. "I know you experience it as well." I held my breath, caught in my throat, as her words resonated. She was right. I had sensed the tension, the unspoken connection that had been building between us for weeks. I had tried to dismiss it to convince myself it was a fluke, but now, with her standing so near, her gaze fixed on mine, denial was no longer an option. I started to speak, but my voice faltered. I couldn't articulate a coherent thought. Then, Ellen's hand moved gently, brushing against my arm. The slightest contact sent a surge of electricity through me, quickening my pulse. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered, a knowing smile spreading across her lips. "Just stop pretending before I could say anything." Emily leaned in, her lips barely grazing my cheek. It was a simple gesture, almost innocent, but it set off a firestorm in me. The reality of the moment overwhelmed me, confirming that it was more than just, "Don't say anything." She gave me a knowing smile and a subtle nod. "Stop pretending," or I'll stop. Emily leaned in and kissed my cheek. It was simple, but it made me feel things I didn't even know I could feel. I felt sure that this wasn't just in my imagination. This unspoken tension, this undeniable connection, was real. Emily felt it too, and there was no turning back. Her lips lingered on my cheek for a moment, a tease that made my heart go faster. I could feel the warmth of her breath against my skin, the subtle pressure of her lips, a ghost of a touch that I could tell Emily was into it, but she didn't say a word. I was caught up in the moment, and I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to pull away, but another part of me wanted to keep going. I wanted to explore this attraction, but I didn't know how to act. Emily didn't move. Emily, I really want more of you. I'm not sure what to say. Part of me wants to pull away before this gets out of hand, but another part of me really wants her to be close. I want to explore this attraction, even though it's not supposed to be. She just smiled that soft smile that makes my heart race. She asked innocently, like nothing was wrong, but we were clearly still tense. I started to say that we can't, but the words felt empty. My mind was spinning with confusion, trying to make sense of it all. She smiled that soft, knowing smile that made my heart race. She asked innocently, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, but the tension between us was undeniable. It was like crackling static electricity in the air. I started to say, but we can't, but the words felt hollow, devoid of conviction. My mind whirled with confusion, trying to reconcile the impropriety of the situation with the undeniable desire that surged within me. This was Emily, my stepsister. This was wrong, wasn't it? But then she moved again, stepping closer, her body gently brushing against mine. I could feel the heat radiating from her and the softness of her touch as she reached up and placed her hand gently on my chest. I was caught off guard by the situation, and I was overcome with an intense desire. This was Emily, my stepsister. This was wrong, wasn't it? But then she moved again, coming closer, her body gently brushing against mine. I could feel the heat radiating from her and the softness of her touch as she reached up and placed her hand gently on my chest. My breath caught as a wave of emotions washed over me. Confusion, excitement, and a longing that I couldn't quite name. Her gaze was fixed upon me, a challenge evident in their depths. I swallowed with difficulty, attempting to clear my mind, but it was impossible to think clearly with her proximity. Her touch gave me the chills along my spine. Do you understand? I was overwhelmed by a mix of emotions, confusion, excitement, and a deep longing I couldn't name. Her gaze was fixed on me, and I could see the challenge in her eyes. I had a hard time thinking clearly with her so close. Her touch made me nervous. I tried to speak, but my voice was shaky and uncertain. Emily's hand moved down my chest, and her fingertips traced a path that made my heart race. I asked her gently, "Do I inquire?" Her lips formed a playful smile. "Since it seems you've been longing for this as much as I have," she said. "Hit me hard. Were my feelings true? I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but her touch made me feel things I didn't know I had. I felt a mix of guilt and excitement. But there was something else, too, a thrilling sense of anticipation. I realized that I had been yearning for this moment, without even realizing it. I started to speak, but my voice faltered. Emily took another step closer. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I thought about it. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. But there was something else, too, a thrilling sense of anticipation. I realized that I had been yearning for this moment. I started to speak, but my voice faltered. Emily took another step closer, her body pressing against mine. I could feel the rapid beat of her heart against my chest. Her eyes were intense. She was a mix of desire and curiosity, and it was impossible to look away. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. Her hand slid up to caress my neck, her thumb gently tracing my jawline. "You no longer need to pretend." It felt as though everything I knew was shifting. I could feel her body pressed against mine. I could feel her heart beating really fast against my chest. Her eyes were intense, and I could tell she was a mix of desire and curiosity. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. Her hand slid up to caress my neck, and her thumb gently traced my jawline. You no longer need to pretend. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. She shook her head, and with the softest of touches, she silenced me. Her fingers gently brushed against my lips. It's okay, she whispered. Her voice was steady and reassuring. You don't have to say anything. And then, before I could protest, Emily leaned on her lips, pressing against mine in a kiss that was both tender and reassuring. I tried to say something, but I couldn't. Emily shook her head and touched my lips with her fingers. It's okay, she said. Her voice was steady and reassuring. You don't have to say anything. Then, before I could say anything, Emily leaned in and kissed me. It was tender and exciting. At first, the kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, as if she was offering me an opportunity to pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself kissing her back. My hands automatically went to her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss got stronger, gradually and purposefully, and I felt a surge of warmth. I felt a surge of warmth that spread through my body, igniting every nerve and sensation. Emily's hands held my hair, her body nestled against mine, squeezing my breath, but I didn't want to stop. This felt real, and it was exciting to be doing something so out of the ordinary. When we finally parted ways, we were both still breathing heavily. I was with Emily, and it felt so good. We were breathing hard, and it felt like time stood still. Then we were on the ground, and I was breathing again. I was surprised, and I said something to Emily. She smiled at me, and I felt my heart beating faster. What does it feel like? I don't know, but it felt like everything changed. Our tension had been building for a while, and then it just erupted. I was nervous, but I also felt excited. I don't know how to describe it. I looked at her, my eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and nervousness. I took a deep breath, my thoughts still jumbled. I wasn't sure how to answer. It felt like everything had changed, like the tension we'd been building up finally exploded. But it also felt permanent, like there was no going back. I just didn't know. I said, I don't know, and held her waist with my hands. We can't do this, Emily, I added. Her smile faltered, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at me with such intensity that my heart started pounding. Why not? She asked gently. Why can't we? Her words sent a shock of confusion and excitement through me. I don't know, it just happened. I confessed that my hands were still on her waist, but we can't do this. Emily's smile changed, but she didn't take her hands off. Instead, she looked at me with such intensity that my heart started racing. Why not? She asked softly. Why can't we? Her words sent a shock of confusion and excitement through me. This was wrong. It had to be. But the way she looked at me, the way she had kissed me, made everything seem so real, so undeniable. You're my stepsister, she said, her voice weak. It sounded more like a justification than an explanation. Emily arched an eyebrow, her grin returning as she asked, What's going on? I knew this was wrong, but I couldn't deny it. Everything about her looked and felt so real, so undeniable. You're my stepsister, she said, her voice soft but firm. Emily arched an eyebrow, her smile growing as she asked, You mean there's no biological connection between us? We're just two people. That shouldn't stop you from doing what you want. Her reasoning was a bit confusing, but she was right. We weren't biologically related, but we were connected through our parents' marriage. Still, the gravity of the situation was undeniable. Her voice was soft but firm. We weren't related, but we were connected by our parents' marriage. That connection was significant. But what about them? What about Dad and Catherine? I asked Emily. Her smile faded, and she sighed softly. She stepped back a little to create some space between us. I don't know, she admitted, her voice quiet. But I know I don't want to pretend like nothing's happening. Between us, Emily said, her voice quiet but firm. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Guilt, confusion, and something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. What could we do? She was right. We couldn't keep pretending. Our tension had been growing for too long. Now that it had surfaced, there was no going back. I don't know. If we just ignore this, I said, my mind still reeling. Emily nodded, her eyes softening. We don't have to figure everything out right now. We can take it one step at a time, she said, Her words brought a strange sense of calm to the storm raging inside me. She was right. We didn't have to have all the answers. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest begin to ease. "Okay, one step at a time," I said softly. Emily smiled a genuine smile this time, and the sight of it made my heart swell. "We figure it out," she said quietly. "Right off the bat, we had to be real with ourselves and each other about what was going on." I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest start to ease. "Okay," I said softly, "one step at a time." Emily smiled a genuine smile this time, and the sight of it made my heart swell. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly. Together, and in that moment, I believed her, but the story was far from over. The days following that charged encounter in the kitchen, in a haze of anticipation and apprehension, the tension between Emily and me only intensified, fueled by the memory of our forbidden kiss and the undeniable shift in our relationship. We tried to act like nothing had changed, but it was hard. Every time we were in the same room, the air crackled with unspoken desire, and every accidental touch sent shivers down my spine. I could see the same intensity in Emily's eyes, a magnetic pull it pulled us closer, even though it wasn't safe. About a week later, I was sitting on the couch in the living room, trying to watch TV, but I couldn't stop thinking about the things I wanted to do. I could hear Emily moving around in the kitchen. The sound of metal on metal was all I could hear. We were getting along pretty well, but there was something about Emily that was off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I was restless, and I couldn't focus on the TV. I could hear Emily moving around in the kitchen, and I could hear the dishes clinking and the cabinet doors closing. It was like a symphony of domesticity, but it wasn't soothing at all. My parents and Catherine were out, so the house was really quiet. I could feel my restlessness growing, and I couldn't stop thinking about Emily. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me. The dishes and the soft closing of cabinet doors made me restless. My parents were out, so the house was quiet. I couldn't stop thinking about Emily. I remembered her lips on mine, how her touch felt, and how it felt to be alone with her. I felt more and more attracted to her. As I was getting ready to go to my room, Emily came out of the kitchen, drying her hands with a dish towel. The more I thought about it, the more I felt an unmistakable attraction to her. As I was getting ready to go to my room, Emily appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands with a dish towel. She stopped in the doorway and looked at me, and I felt a rush of anticipation. "Are you all right, Alex?" she asked. Her tone was gentle, but there was also a hint of worry in it. I nodded, and she went into the living room, threw the dish towel onto a nearby chair, and sat down. She stopped in the doorway and looked at me. I felt excited, and I could tell she was nervous too. "Are you okay, Alex?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but she sounded worried. I nodded. She went into the living room, threw the dish towel on a chair, and sat down on the couch a few feet away. The air between us was thick with unspoken desires. My heart was beating really fast, and she looked at me with her eyes, like she was trying to figure out how to say something. I wasn't sure what to say, because all I could think about was her and our relationship since that night in the kitchen. I had a hard time expressing those feelings and accepting that our relationship was more than just friends. Eventually, I said what I was thinking, but barely. Emily kept staring at me. She was determined, and I agreed that we should just be quiet for a minute. I could feel the tension in the air. We were attracted to each other, and I felt like if we didn't leave right away, we'd do something risky. I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that step, even though my body seemed to know what it was doing. I leaned over to her, attracted by. I felt an unseen force drawing us closer, and Emily's eyes showed the same longing I felt. We decided to take things slow, and I whispered, my voice shaking with anticipation. Emily smiled, knowing what I was feeling, and I felt my heart speed up. We were moving carefully, and she responded gently, but that didn't change anything. "We're taking it slow." Emily gave me a knowing smile that made my heart race. She said we should keep an eye on the current situation, but that doesn't mean we should ignore what's going on. Her words got me going, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in closer, bringing us even closer. Emily came up to me, and our lips barely touched in a soft and nervous kiss. It was similar to our first time, but without We should forget about the current situation. Her words got me excited, and before I could stop myself, I leaned closer, getting us even closer. Emily came up to me, and her lips touched mine in a kiss that was soft and unsure, like the first time, but without any of the uncertainty. This time, it was just the two of us, and we felt the unmistakable connection that had been growing for weeks. The kiss got stronger and more intentional as I felt Emily's hand go up to touch the back of my neck, pulling me closer to her. My heart was beating really fast, and my skin felt electrified by the intensity of the moment. It was as though the world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us. We were engulfed in a tempest of illicit longing. When we eventually separated, we were both panting, our foreheads touching, as we tried to calm down. It seemed like the world disappeared, and for a brief instant, it seemed as though it was like the world disappeared and we were just left with our two selves. We were both breathing heavily, our foreheads touching, trying to calm down. It felt like we were the only people in the world. I told her to stop, but I was barely speaking, and my words felt empty. My hands were still on her waist, and I couldn't let go. Emily smiled gently as she stroked my cheek. Do you really want to stop her? Were we the only people in the world? I told her to stop, but my voice was barely a whisper compared to her whispering. My hands were still on her waist, and I didn't want to let go. Emily smiled gently and stroked my cheek. Do you really want to stop her? She asked. Her voice was a whisper, and it made me shiver. I started to shake, and I could feel my heart beating really fast against my ribs. I wasn't sure. I told her I wasn't sure, and she sighed and said she didn't want to make things more complicated. Her forehead was still against mine, and our breaths mixed together. I'm not sure what to do, but I'm with her. I felt like I was on the verge of something new, like I was discovering a connection that had been hidden, waiting for the right moment to show up. I don't know what to do, but I'm with her. I said something barely above a whisper, and she leaned in, her eyes locking with mine. We made a silent promise. I'm not sure what to do, but I'm with her. I felt like I was on the verge of something new, like I was discovering a connection that had been hidden, waiting for the right moment to show up. I don't know what to do, but I'm with her. She sighed, showing that she didn't want to make things more complicated. Our foreheads were still touching, and our breaths mixed together. The space between us. I understood. She said something, her voice understanding, but maybe we weren't making things more complicated. Maybe we were just exploring the unknown. Her words felt like a spark of truth in the confusion. This didn't feel like a mistake, a bad thing against the idea of our relationship. The space between us felt like an awakening, like we finally found a connection that had been dormant, waiting for the right moment to blossom. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice barely audible. Emily leaned closer, her eyes locking with mine, and whispered a silent promise. It was an intense moment, an exhilarating dance of desire. Emily and I shared a look, and before I could say anything, she kissed me. It was a passionate kiss that unleashed a flood of emotions, releasing all the longing we had both been holding back. We surrendered to the moment, our bodies entwined, our souls connecting. It was an exhilarating, scary, and freeing dance of forbidden desire. Our emotions were so intense, and before I knew it, the moment had passed. But Emily didn't seem to mind. It was a shared experience, and we recognized the bond that united us. Emily took a playful smile, and it was an intense dance of desire. Our emotions were so intense, and before I knew it, the moment had passed. But Emily didn't seem to mind. It was a shared experience, and we recognized the bond that united us. Emily smiled playfully, and then she left, vowing to resolve the situation. She left me exhilarated and wanting more. I agreed, but internally, I saw how complex the situation was. We had gone beyond a boundary and entered uncharted territory with no possibility of retreat. In the days that followed, I realized how serious things had become. We were in this weird mix of normal and intense awareness. Every glance, every touch, and every shared moment was intense, even if we didn't talk about what happened. The connection between us was obvious, like an unseen thread that was there in every interaction. I tried to stick to my usual routine, but the world felt different, sharper, more vibrant. I was really aware of Emily, her every move, there was a weird mix of normalcy and heightened awareness. There was a lot of intensity in every glance, every touch, and every shared moment. We didn't talk about what happened, but the bond between us was obvious in every interaction. I tried to stick to my usual routine, but the world seemed different, sharper, more vibrant. I was really aware of Emily's presence, her every movement, her every breath. The atmosphere was filled with unspoken desires, turning every encounter into a delicate game of anticipation and fear. About a week later, we were alone in the house again. My dad and Catherine were out for dinner, leaving us in a silence that made our hidden feelings even stronger. I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to be interested in a magazine, but I was thinking about Emily, the memory of her kiss, and the forbidden yearning. A week or so later, we were alone again, and I felt all the tension in the air. My dad and Catherine were out, so we just sat there in silence. I was thinking about Emily, and I couldn't stop. I felt this rush of emotions, and I knew I had to talk to her. I put the magazine down, and I felt my heart beating out of my chest. I knew this conversation was coming, but I was nervous. I said, "Yes, we need to talk." My voice was shaking. That got me thinking. Emily came into the kitchen, moving like she owned the place. I felt my heart start racing as she sat down across from me. The dim light made her shadows look like she was casting a spell. She said, "We need to talk," in a voice that was both gentle and firm. I put the magazine down, even though I knew this conversation was coming. I was nervous. We couldn't deny the truth anymore. "Yeah, I get it," I said, my voice showing how nervous I was. Elin leaned forward, her hands on the table. She didn't say anything for a minute, just looking at me like she was trying to think of what to say. The silence was super heavy, and it felt like we were holding each other's breath. She said, "I don't know what to do," her voice showing how nervous she was. She said she wasn't sure about what we were supposed to do. I nodded, swallowing hard. My mind was trying to figure out what to say, but I hadn't dealt with this issue yet, so I was struggling.